My husband cheated on me with my sister. When I got divorced, I found another partner. When I was planning the wedding, I didn't want to invite my sister, but my parents threatened that if she didn't come, they wouldn't come either. I don't even know how to start this. It still feels unreal. I, 27F, have been with my boyfriend, Lucas, 29M, for almost 3 years. We had this perfect life planned out, get married next summer, buy a house together, maybe even start a family. He's the person I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. But that was before I found out about the biggest betrayal I've ever experienced. The worst part? It wasn't just Lucas who betrayed me. It was my sister, Emma, 25F. Emma and I were always close. Growing up, we were inseparable. She's only 2 years younger than me, and our parents always talked about how lucky they were to have daughters who got along so well. When Lucas and I first started dating, she was thrilled. She said things like, "He's so perfect for you, and I can see you two being together forever." It feels like such a cruel joke now. Let me back up a bit. A few months ago, I started noticing things with Lucas that didn't sit right with me. He became distant, distracted, always on his phone. When I'd ask who he was texting, he'd brush me off with a vague answer. Just work. Or it's nothing important. I didn't push it because I trusted him. I trusted him. But then I started feeling like I was going crazy. There were small, subtle signs. One night, we were out to dinner, and Lucas got up to take a call. He was gone for about 10 minutes, and when he came back, he seemed tense. I asked if everything was okay, and he smiled and said it was just work being stressful. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Then things started disappearing. Little things. His favorite jacket, his cologne, his phone charger. At first, I thought he was just leaving them at work or in his car, but when I'd ask, he'd get defensive. "Why are you keeping tabs on me?" he'd snap. It was unlike him to be so short-tempered. Meanwhile, Emma had been around a lot more than usual. She dropped by my apartment without warning or invite me out for drinks, which wasn't really like her. Don't get me wrong, we've always been close, but she's the type who values her space. So, her sudden eagerness to hang out felt off. Still, I didn't think much of it because, well, she's my sister. Then one night, everything came crashing down. Lucas had gone out with some friends from work. At least, that's what he told me. I decided to invite Emma over for a movie night. It was something we hadn't done in ages, and I figured it'd be a good way to take my mind off the weirdness with Lucas. We ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and settled in to watch some cheesy rom-com. At some point during the movie, Emma got up to use the bathroom. Her phone was on the coffee table, and I didn't mean to snoop, but a message popped up on the screen. It was from Lucas. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe they were planning something for me, like a surprise or something. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the message. It wasn't a surprise. It was a fucking nightmare. The message read, "Can't wait to see you later. Last night was incredible. I'll think of an excuse to get out of here soon." I just sat there, staring at the screen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real, right? There was no way Lucas and Emma? No. It had to be a misunderstanding. But when I scrolled up, the truth was undeniable. There were months of messages between them. Flirty, intimate, secretive messages. They'd been seeing each other behind my back for 6 months. 6 fucking months. I felt like I was going to throw up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto the phone. When Emma came back into the room, she saw the look on my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, feigning innocence. I didn't even say anything. I just held up her phone, showing her the screen. Her face went pale. "Shit," she whispered. That's all she could say. Shit. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "How could you do this to me?" I screamed. "You're my sister. How could you sleep with my boyfriend?" My voice cracked, and tears streamed down my face. The betrayal was like a physical pain in my chest. Emma started crying, too, but her tears only made me angrier. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she sobbed. It just happened." That phrase made me want to slap her. It just happened. As if they tripped and fallen into bed together by accident. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How long? I demanded. How long has this been going on? She hesitated for a moment, then whispered, 6 months. 6 months. I'd been living in blissful ignorance while my sister and boyfriend carried on behind my back for half a year. The realization hit me like a truck, and I felt my knees buckle. I sat down on the couch, numb, barely able to breathe. Emma sat down next to me, still crying. I'm so sorry, she kept saying over and over, but her apologies meant nothing. They didn't undo what she had done. Nothing could. Get out, I whispered. She looked at me, confused. What? Get out, I repeated, louder this time. Please, just let me explain, she begged. I don't want to hear it, I said, my voice trembling with rage. Just get out of my apartment. She tried to plead with me one last time, but I was done. I didn't have the strength to argue. I just wanted her gone. Eventually, she grabbed her things and left, still crying. The moment the door closed behind her, I broke down. I sobbed harder than I ever had in my life. How could this happen? How could the two people I trusted most in the world betray me like this? I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, replaying every moment of my relationship with Lucas and my bond with Emma, trying to figure out how I missed the signs. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. There were signs. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The next day, I confronted Lucas. When he came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my arms crossed, waiting for him. He looked surprised to see me, probably because I was supposed to be at work. Hey, he said, trying to act casual. Why aren't you at the office? I didn't waste any time. How long have you been sleeping with Emma? His face went from confused to shocked in an instant. He didn't even try to deny it. He started, but I cut him off. Don't. Just tell me how long. He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at the floor. 6 months, he admitted. I felt a fresh wave of nausea wash over me. Hearing it from him made it feel even more real, more painful. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this to me? He didn't have a good answer. He mumbled something about how things had gotten complicated between us, how he didn't mean to hurt me, but none of it mattered. The damage was done. I told him to pack his things and leave. There was no chance in hell I was going to stay with someone who could betray me like that. He tried to apologize, to tell me he still loved me, but I didn't care. His words were empty. Within an hour, he was gone. I thought the worst part of my life had already passed when I read those messages on Emma's phone, but I was wrong. The hardest part came when I had to face them both, my sister and my boyfriend. Two people I thought would never hurt me in a million years. Two people who not only hurt me but betrayed me in the worst way possible. After I found out about the affair, I spent the night alone. I didn't cry much after Emma left. I was too shocked for tears. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't keep this to myself forever. I had to confront both of them. It wasn't enough to see their secret conversations. I needed to hear it from them, face to face. The next morning, I made up my mind. I was going to confront Lucas first. Lucas had stayed the night at a hotel after I kicked him out, but we hadn't talked since. I texted him that morning, telling him I wanted to meet. He must have known what was coming because he replied quickly, agreeing to come over. Part of me hoped he'd have some sort of explanation, something that would make this all less horrible, though I knew better. He arrived around noon, looking disheveled, almost like he hadn't slept. The sight of him made my stomach churn. How could I have loved this man? How could he stand here in front of me, knowing what he'd done, and not feel shame? I'm here, he said, awkwardly standing by the doorway, his hands shoved in his pockets. He wasn't wearing his usual calm, collected look. Instead, he looked anxious, almost as if he were the victim in all of this. Sit down, I said, pointing to the couch. My voice was steady, but my heart was racing. Lucas sat down but kept his eyes on the floor. The room was silent, the tension between us almost unbearable. I couldn't stand to look at him, but I forced myself to speak. How long? I asked, breaking the silence. He hesitated, then mumbled, 6 months. 6 months. The same answer Emma gave me. The confirmation felt like a knife twisting in my chest, but I had to keep going. I needed the whole truth, no matter how much it hurt. And why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why her? Why my sister? Lucas finally looked up at me, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it didn't matter. Nothing he said could fix this. I don't know, he muttered, his voice low. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to. It was never supposed to go this far. I laughed bitterly. It just happened? That's all you've got? You've been sneaking around with my sister for 6 months, and all you can say is that it just happened. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. I know it sounds awful, but it's the truth. We didn't plan this. One night, I don't know. One thing led to another and, spare me the details, I cut him off, feeling sick to my stomach. I don't need to hear about how you fell into bed with my sister. I just need to understand why you thought it was okay to lie to me. To betray me like this. Lucas looked down again, his face full of guilt. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. His apology felt empty, meaningless. How could he stand there and apologize when he had been lying to my face for half a year? You never wanted to hurt me? I repeated, my voice rising. You think this wasn't going to hurt me? You think sleeping with my sister behind my back wasn't the worst thing you could do? I know it was wrong, he said, his voice breaking slightly. But things were complicated between us. You were always so busy with work, and we weren't connecting like we used to. And Emma, don't, I snapped. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I didn't push you into her arms. You chose to do this. You chose to betray me. Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand to stop him. I couldn't listen to any more excuses. I didn't care why he did it anymore. The damage was done. You need to leave, I said quietly, my voice shaking with emotion. I don't ever want to see you again. He didn't argue. He stood up slowly, his head hanging low, and made his way to the door. But before he left, he turned to look at me one last time. I really am sorry, he said softly, but his apology meant nothing to me. I was numb. When the door finally closed behind him, I collapsed onto the couch, my body shaking with sobs. The reality of what had just happened was sinking in. Lucas was gone, and so was my relationship with him. The life we had planned, the future I had envisioned, was gone in an instant. But the worst part wasn't over yet. I still had to confront Emma. The thought of facing her made my stomach turn. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to. I couldn't let her get away with this. She had betrayed me just as much, if not more, than Lucas had. She was my sister, the one person who was supposed to have my back no matter what, and she had stabbed me in the back instead. I decided to confront her that same day. I couldn't put it off any longer. I texted her, telling her I needed to talk. She didn't respond right away, but after about an hour, she finally texted back. I'm sorry. That one text made me want to scream. Sorry? That's all she had to say after everything? She didn't even have the decency to explain herself. I drove to her apartment in a haze, barely able to see through the tears in my eyes. When I got there, I didn't even knock. I just walked in. She was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I hated the sight of her in that moment. My own sister, who I had trusted with everything, had destroyed my life. We need to talk, I said coldly. Emma nodded, her face pale. I know. I stood in front of her, arms crossed, trying to hold back the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Why? I demanded, my voice shaking. Why did you do this to me? She stared down at her hands, not able to look me in the eye. I don't know, she whispered. Bullshit, I snapped. There's no way you don't know. You made a choice, Emma. You chose to sleep with my boyfriend. You chose to lie to me for 6 months. So don't tell me you don't know why. She finally looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean to hurt you, she sobbed. I swear, I never wanted this to happen. Then why did it? I shouted, my voice echoing through the apartment. If you didn't want to hurt me, then why did you do it? Why didn't you stop it? She shook her head, wiping away her tears. I don't know. Lucas and I got close, and it just happened. I know it's horrible, and I know I've ruined everything, but I didn't mean for it to go this far. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was the same excuse Lucas had given me, the same pathetic justification for their betrayal. You didn't mean for it to go this far? I repeated bitterly. That's the best you've got? You were screwing my boyfriend behind my back, Emma. You don't get to act like this was some kind of accident. She sobbed harder, but I felt no sympathy for her. I was too angry, too hurt to care about her tears. I trusted you, I said quietly, my voice trembling. You're my sister. You were supposed to have my back, and instead, you stabbed me in it. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know I've destroyed everything. I hate myself for what I've done. Good, I said coldly. You should. The room fell silent for a moment as we both sat there, the weight of what had happened hanging in the air. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to make her feel as much pain as I was feeling. But another part of me just wanted to leave and never speak to her again. Do you love him? I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Emma looked up at me, startled. What? Do you love him? I repeated. Lucas, do you love him? She hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. No, she whispered. I don't. It wasn't like that. I didn't know if I believed her, but it didn't matter anymore. Whatever she felt for Lucas, it was too late. She had already destroyed everything between us. I can't do this anymore, I said, standing up. I can't be around you. I don't want to see you. I don't want to talk to you. You're not my sister anymore. Emma sobbed harder, but I turned my back on her and walked out the door. I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to get away from her, from everything. As I drove home, the reality of what had happened started to sink in. My relationship with Lucas was over. My bond with Emma was shattered. Everything I had known, everything I had trusted, was gone. I was completely alone. After the confrontation with Emma and Lucas, I thought I was done being shocked. I thought nothing could hurt me more than hearing the two people I loved most confess to the worst betrayal of my life. But there was one more blow waiting for me. One I hadn't anticipated, though maybe I should have. The betrayal of my own parents. I drove to their house the day after my confrontation with Emma, still raw with emotion. I hadn't slept at all the night before. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. Over and over, I tried to understand how my own sister could do this to me. But there was no understanding it. There was no excuse that could make it right. When the morning light finally broke through the window, I made up my mind. I needed to tell my parents. I needed them to know what Emma had done. I needed their support, their outrage, their comfort. Emma had betrayed me, and Lucas was out of my life. But my parents, they were supposed to be the ones I could count on. I called them as soon as I got out of bed, asking if I could come over. They sounded cheerful on the phone, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. Of course, sweetie. Come by whenever you like, my mom said. I could hear her humming in the background, probably in the middle of cooking breakfast for my dad. It was a normal day for them. But for me, nothing was normal anymore. The drive to their house felt surreal. I kept rehearsing in my head what I was going to say. How do you even begin a conversation like that? Hey, Mom and Dad, guess what? Emma's been screwing my boyfriend for 6 months. No, there was no easy way to break this kind of news. When I finally pulled into their driveway, my heart was pounding. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, trying to steady myself. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I was sure that once they heard the truth, they would be furious. They'd be just as devastated as I was. I knocked on the door, and my mom answered with a bright smile, as if everything was still okay in the world. There's my girl, she said, pulling me into a hug. Come in, come in. We were just about to have breakfast. The smell of pancakes and bacon filled the house, and for a brief moment, I was reminded of how safe and comforting my parents' home had always been. But that comfort was shattered as soon as I remembered why I was there. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking slightly. My dad looked up from his newspaper, smiling. Well, look who decided to visit. You're just in time. Want some pancakes? I shook my head. No, I'm not hungry. My mom glanced at me, concern flickering in her eyes. You okay? Sweetheart? You look a little pale. This was it. I had to tell them. There was no easy way to do it, no way to cushion the blow. So, I just said it. Emma has been having an affair with Lucas. I blurted out, my voice breaking. The room went silent. My dad slowly put down his newspaper, and my mom froze, her spatula hovering over the stove. What? My mom whispered, turning to look at me, her face full of confusion. I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. Emma and Lucas. They've been sleeping together behind my back. For 6 months. My dad's face turned pale, and he stared at me as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. My mom, on the other hand, looked like she had just been slapped across the face. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I found out yesterday, I continued, my voice shaking. I confronted them both, and they admitted it. Lucas is gone. I kicked him out. My mom finally managed to find her voice. Wait, are you sure? There must be some kind of misunderstanding. I stared at her, stunned. A misunderstanding? No, Mom, there's no misunderstanding. I saw the messages. I confronted them. They admitted it. My dad was still silent, his expression unreadable. My mom, however, seemed to be struggling to process the information. Sweetie, I don't know what to say, she stammered. This is terrible. But are you sure it's really what you think? Maybe Emma made a mistake. Maybe it wasn't as serious as... Are you kidding me? I snapped, feeling a surge of anger. Not as serious? She's been sleeping with my boyfriend for 6 months, Mom. How much more serious does it need to be? My mom flinched at the harshness of my words, but I didn't care. I was hurt, furious, and I needed them to understand that this wasn't something that could just be brushed aside. I know, she said quickly. It's just, Emma's your sister. And Lucas, well, he's gone now, right? Maybe we can all sit down and talk about this. Maybe there's a way to work through it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had come here expecting them to be on my side, to support me, but instead, my mom was already talking about reconciliation. No, Mom, I said firmly. There's no working through this. Emma betrayed me. She destroyed my relationship, and I don't know if I can ever forgive her for that. My dad finally spoke up, his voice quiet but steady. Your mother's right, you know. Emma's your sister, and no matter what she's done, family is family. You can't just throw that away. I stared at him in disbelief. Throw it away? Dad, she's the one who threw it away when she decided to sleep with Lucas. How can you sit there and defend her after what she did to me? We're not defending her, my mom said quickly. We're just trying to see the bigger picture. Yes, what she did was wrong, but she's still your sister. And Lucas is out of the picture now. Maybe, with time, you can work things out. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Here I was, pouring my heart out to them, expecting them to be furious on my behalf. And instead, they were already trying to smooth things over, trying to get me to forgive and forget. I can't believe this, I said, my voice trembling with anger. I came here because I needed your support, but all you care about is keeping the peace with Emma. That's not true, my dad said, frowning. We care about you, but we also care about your relationship with your sister. You've always been so close. We don't want to see that ruined. It is ruined, I shouted, standing up from the table. She ruined it when she decided to sleep with my boyfriend. I can't just pretend that didn't happen. My mom put down the spatula and walked over to me, her hands outstretched as if to calm me down. Sweetheart, please. We're just trying to help. We know you're hurting, but time heals all wounds. You don't want to cut your sister out of your life over a mistake. A mistake? I repeated, my voice full of disbelief. This wasn't just a mistake, Mom. This was a choice she made, over and over again, for 6 months. How can you stand there and defend her? We're not defending what she did, my dad said, his voice firmer now. But we're also not going to let this tear our family apart. We've been through too much together. I felt the anger boiling inside me, threatening to spill over. How could they not see how much this was hurting me? How could they be more concerned about preserving some illusion of family unity than about what Emma had done to me? I can't do this, I said, shaking my head. I thought you'd understand, but clearly you don't. You're more worried about Emma than you are about me. That's not true, my mom said quickly. We're worried about both of you. Well, it doesn't feel like it, I shot back. It feels like you're more concerned about making sure everything goes back to normal, like this never happened. We just want to see you and Emma reconcile, my dad said, his tone softening. We don't want to lose either of you. Well, maybe you should have thought about that before defending her, I said bitterly. My mom's face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't the reaction I had hoped for. I wanted them to be angry, to be on my side. But instead, they were tiptoeing around the issue, trying to preserve some false sense of family harmony. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? My mom called after me, her voice full of worry. Home, I said coldly. I can't be here right now. Please, don't go like this, my dad said, standing up from the table. We'll figure this out, okay? We'll talk to Emma, and we'll figure out how to move forward as a family. I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. There is no moving forward, Dad. Not with her. Not after what she's done. With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had gone to my parents for support, for comfort, and instead, they had sided with Emma. Maybe they didn't say it outright, but that's what it felt like. They were more interested in preserving the family than in standing by me. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, the weight of everything pressing down on me. First Lucas, then Emma, and now my parents. It felt like everyone in my life had turned their back on me. I was completely alone. The tears came then, hot and fast, and I didn't try to stop them. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I let myself cry. I cried for the loss of my relationship, for the betrayal of my sister, and for the realization that even my parents weren't truly on my side. I had never felt so utterly abandoned in my life. Planning a wedding was supposed to be one of the happiest times in my life. After everything I had been through with Lucas and Emma, meeting Mark felt like a breath of fresh air. He was different from anyone I had ever been with, kind, patient, and most importantly, trustworthy. We had been together for almost 2 years when he proposed, and I knew right away that I wanted to marry him. He made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. But as we started planning the wedding, I realized there was one dark cloud hanging over everything. My sister, Emma. The thought of inviting her to my wedding made my stomach turn. Even after all this time, I hadn't forgiven her. How could I? She had destroyed my relationship with Lucas, and more than that, she had destroyed my trust in her. There were still moments when I found myself wondering if I had done something wrong, something to push Lucas away, even though I knew deep down that their affair wasn't my fault. The scars were still there, and I wasn't ready to face her, let alone have her at my wedding. Mark and I were sitting at the dining table one evening, working on the guest list. It was a fun process at first, picking out which friends we wanted to share the day with. But as we got closer to the end of the list, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. What about your family? Mark asked, glancing over at me. I hesitated, my pen hovering over the paper. My parents, obviously, I said slowly. But not Emma. Mark looked up at me, his expression soft but curious. He knew the whole story about what had happened between me, Lucas, and Emma. I had told him everything early on in our relationship because I didn't want to hide anything from him. He had been incredibly understanding, but we hadn't really talked about Emma since. Are you sure? He asked gently. I nodded. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm not ready to forgive her, and I don't want her there. Mark reached across the table and took my hand. I support whatever decision you make, he said. It's your family, your wedding. You should feel comfortable and happy on that day, not stressed or upset. I smiled at him, grateful for his support, but even as I said the words, I knew this wasn't going to be easy. My parents had always been the kind of people who put family first, no matter what. They had been pushing me to reconcile with Emma ever since the affair had come to light, but I just wasn't there yet. I didn't know if I would ever be. The next weekend, I went to my parents' house to talk to them. I figured it was better to have this conversation in person, even though I was dreading it. My parents had been so focused on preserving the family, and I knew they wouldn't be happy about my decision. When I arrived, they were sitting in the living room, sipping coffee and reading the Sunday paper. It was such a normal scene, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I sat down across from them, trying to steady my nerves. "I need to talk to you about the wedding," I began, my voice shaky. My mom looked up, smiling. "Of course. We've been meaning to ask how the planning is going." I took a deep breath. "It's going well, but there's something I need to tell you. I'm not inviting Emma to the wedding." The smile on my mom's face faltered, and my dad put down his coffee cup, his expression hardening. They both stared at me in silence for a moment, and I could feel the tension building in the room. "What do you mean you're not inviting her?" my mom asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "I'm not ready to forgive her," I said quietly. "I don't want her there. It's supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I don't want to be reminded of everything she did." My dad frowned, shaking his head. "This is your sister we're talking about, not some random person. You can't just cut her out like that." "I'm not cutting her out," I said, my voice rising slightly. "But she betrayed me, Dad. She slept with Lucas behind my back for 6 months. How am I supposed to just pretend that didn't happen?" "We've talked about this before," my mom said, her tone firm. "Yes, what Emma did was wrong, but that was a long time ago. She's still your sister, and family is family. You need to let this go." I felt my anger bubbling up inside me. "Let it go?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "You're asking me to invite the person who destroyed my relationship to my wedding. How is that fair to me?" My dad leaned forward, his expression stern. "Life isn't always fair, but you don't just turn your back on family. You need to forgive Emma and move on." "I can't," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "I'm not ready." My mom sighed, looking at me with a mixture of disappointment and frustration. "You need to think about what's best for the family, not just yourself." Her words felt like a slap in the face. Here I was, telling them how much pain Emma had caused me, and all they cared about was keeping the family together. I felt like I was screaming into a void, like no matter what I said, they would never understand. "I am thinking about what's best for me," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't have her at my wedding. I won't." My dad crossed his arms, his face growing darker. "If Emma's not invited, then neither are we." I stared at him, stunned. "What?" "You heard me," he said coldly. "If you're going to exclude your sister from the wedding, then your mother and I won't be there either." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own parents were giving me an ultimatum. Either invite the person who had hurt me the most, or they wouldn't come to my wedding. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Dad, you can't be serious," I said, my voice breaking. "This is my wedding. Don't you want to be there for me?" "We do," my mom said softly, "but we also want you to do the right thing. We want you to forgive Emma and let her be a part of this day. She's your sister, and she loves you." "Loves me?" I laughed bitterly. If she loved me, she wouldn't have done what she did. "We all make mistakes," my dad said, his voice firm. "But family comes first." I felt the tears spilling over, but I refused to let them see me break. I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. "If you really think that Emma deserves to be at my wedding more than you do, then I guess you've made your choice. Don't do this," my mom pleaded, her voice softening. "You'll regret it." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "I think the only thing I'd regret is letting you guilt me into inviting her." With that, I turned and walked out the door. I didn't look back, even as I heard my mom calling after me. I got into my car and drove away, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My own parents had chosen Emma over me. But as much as it hurt, I knew I had made the right decision. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of emotions. On the one hand, I was excited to marry Mark. He was my rock through all of this, constantly reminding me that I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. On the other hand, the pain of my parents' ultimatum hung over me like a dark cloud. I had always imagined them being there on my wedding day, walking me down the aisle, sharing in my happiness. But now, I had to accept that they wouldn't be. As the wedding day approached, I found myself going through waves of doubt. Was I making the right decision by standing my ground? Was it worth losing my parents over this? But every time I thought about it, I came to the same conclusion. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into inviting Emma. I had to do what was best for me, even if it meant they wouldn't be there. The day of the wedding arrived, and as I stood in front of the mirror in my bridal suite, I felt a mixture of emotions. I was nervous, excited, and a little sad. My mom and dad weren't there to see me in my dress, to give me their blessing. But as I looked around at the friends who had gathered to support me, I realized that I wasn't alone. I had a new family now, Mark, and the people who truly cared about my happiness. The ceremony was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle, arm in arm with my best friend, Sarah, instead of my dad, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Mark was waiting for me at the altar, his eyes full of love and reassurance. And in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. My parents weren't there, but I was surrounded by love. I was marrying the man who had stood by me through the hardest time in my life, and that was all that mattered. After the wedding, Mark and I settled into our new life together. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments when I missed my parents, when I wondered if I should have just given in and invited Emma to avoid losing them. But every time I thought about it, I reminded myself that I had done what was right for me. I had chosen my happiness, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. Mark was my constant source of strength. He never pressured me to reconcile with my parents, even though I knew he wished things were different. Instead, he helped me focus on building a new life, one that wasn't defined by the people who had hurt me. I stopped trying to reach out to my parents after a while. At first, I thought maybe they would come around, that they would realize how much they had hurt me by choosing Emma over me. But they never did. And eventually, I stopped waiting for them to. I had a new family now, Mark, and the friends who had been there for me when my own family wasn't. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was a good one. And as I moved forward, I learned to let go of the pain, to accept that not everyone who is supposed to love you will. Sometimes, you have to let go of the people who hurt you, even if they're family.